have you ever been silenced by force? Anyone? Yes, some people. I see some nods. Let me take you back to when I was about 17. I used to love skateboarding, and I would go to the skate park pretty much every day. And one day when I went, there was this guy, TJ, who was there. TJ was jacked. What do you say, cerrado? Cerrado? Jacked. And he was about a foot taller than me. And do you know what TJ was doing? He was going around the skate park on his bike, dumping soda all over the place. I said, TJ, what the hell are you doing? You're making a mess. He said, what you gonna do about it? I said, dude, cut it out. You're gonna ruin this place. You're gonna ruin my skateboard. He said, shut up. And then, you know what he did? Grabbed me by the throat, and I could feel his nails digging into my skin as he choked off the air and silenced me by force. You ever been bullied? Anyone here? I see like 5 hands, but I know that probably 80% of you actually have been, so you don't have to be embarrassed, it's okay. But how did it feel? Did you feel weak, powerless, voiceless? I was pissed. So I summoned the strength of Thor, and I hit him so hard, he flew 10 feet through the air into the side of a porta potty that fell over on top of him and just spilled filth all over him. No, I wish. That didn't happen. No, I had to use my brain over his brawn because, you know, cerrado, like I said. So TJ was a bully who used force to shut people up when they said things he didn't like. But you know what's much, much worse than a bully on the skate park? I know you do. It's a bully in government. A bully who has the power to summon the force of government to shut people up when they say things that he doesn't like. This is the most dangerous form of bully. Why? Because freedom of speech is the most basic of freedoms. Without freedom of speech, we cannot protect any of our other freedoms. I'm sure that you're aware of Mr. Rice's recent exploits. You know, for instance, that he had the federal agents raid the homes of 8 businessmen simply because they had a private discussion in WhatsApp in which one of them expressed a preference for a coup over the return of the Workers' Party government. You're not allowed to have opinions like that. Worse, against the Brazilian Constitution, he has ordered the silencing online of Nicolas Ferreira, who, as I understand it, is this right? He got more votes than any other politician in the recent elections? Yet he can't speak online? How crazy is that? So, I figured we should start today with a quick public service announcement of things that you may not say, okay? Do not say these things. You can't say these things, okay? Don't say Bolsonaro is a pedophile, okay? You can't say that. You can't say Lula will institute unisex bathrooms, or that the election was stolen, or that Lula is corrupt, or that he's a criminal, or that Moraes is a dictator. You can't say those things that I just said. Why not? Because Moraes and others in the Brazilian government have fallen for what I call the big lie. This idea that suppressing speech solves problems. This is a lie. Suppressing speech never solves problems, okay? We're going to get into why it doesn't solve any problems here in a few minutes. But before we do, I'm curious what sorts of justifications you've heard in defense of the big lie. What are some of the things that people say to justify censoring speech? Just yell it out. Stopping hate speech. Very good. What else? Protect minorities. Protect democracy. What else? Yell it. Yes. So those are the big ones. Fighting hate speech, fighting disinformation, like Bolsonaro is a pedophile, as if that wouldn't have come out before the first time he was elected, right? And claims like Lula is going to institute unisex bathrooms or shut down certain churches. So this is one of the big justifications for censorship. And the other is hate speech, which I don't use that term. Well, we can talk more about why, but the basic reason I don't typically use it, and I put it in scare quotes when I do, is because it's a package deal. It packages together two things that are essentially different. It packages together things that are just insulting to other people. Oh, you said something that I found triggering. You used the wrong pronoun when you addressed me, something like that. Packages together speech like that along with speech that actually incites physical force, violence against people. So those are two very different things. I don't think that hate speech is as common a problem here, or the idea of hate speech is as common a problem here as it is in the US. So I brought an example with me today. This is the Westboro Baptist Church. They're considered a hate group in the US, and they're very, very unsavory people. They hate nothing more than the fact that America has legalized gay marriage, because they think this is the worst sin possible. And so they travel the country picketing the funerals of gay men. And they also picket the funerals of soldiers who have died overseas, soldiers in general. Why? Why do they picket the funerals of soldiers? So weird. Because they think that any American failure, any death of Americans is proof of God's retribution against us for having these ideas of liberty for gay people, allowing them to get married. So, very, very unsavory group. Their website is godhatesfags.com. You can get an idea of how bad these ideas are. So, I mean, there is a real attraction, right, to silencing ideas like this. Oh, these people are so irrational. They're so terrible. Why should they be able to say these things? So the charges against free speech, as you guys were nice enough to share with me, misinformation, fake news, and hate speech, things that will overturn democracy, overturn freedom. And the idea underlying the big lie and the defense of the big lie is that ideas need to be quarantined so that certain people don't think those ideas. That we need to confine those ideas so that they don't get out there and infect more people. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound a little bit like our response to a disease that you might have heard of that begins with a C and ends with an ovid? This idea that we need to lock down ideas, lock them down so that people don't think them. I call this the germ theory of ideas. The idea that ideas themselves infect people. Just like a virus. They get out there and they infect people by getting into their minds. Here's a statement of one proponent of this idea, and I'm going to ask you in a minute if you can tell me, if you can guess who said this, okay? In order to protect itself effectively against lies and slander, the state has to be allowed to compromise basic rights like freedom of the press. Who could have said that? Any guesses? Who do you think said this? Hitler? Stalin? What was that last one? Who? Ah, Karl Popper. Interesting. Yeah, some Germans in there. This was actually written by a German newspaperman, mainstream newspaper writer, who considered himself a liberal, somebody liberal in the way that you use the term here, somebody who was in defense of liberty. So this goes to show you that even people who consider themselves somewhat liberal, somewhat in defense of liberty, even they often fall prey to this big lie, this idea that suppressing speech solves problems. So he said this in the years leading up to and before the Nazi regime. We'll see how that played out here in a minute, okay? So this brings us to a really important question. Are ideas actually like germs? Are they actually like germs, or are they crucially different? And I would say that in one important respect they are. Lockdowns are as ineffective and have as many backlashes for ideas as they do for diseases. So total coronavirus cases in China, as you see here, China had some of the longest and strictest lockdowns in the world, and what were they actually accomplishing with those? They merely delayed the spread, well, pretty much ruining their economy and hurting the lives of millions and millions of people, right? So what do we think happens when we try to lock down ideas? It's pretty much the same. We delay the spread sometimes, in some cases, but actually there are a whole bunch of ways in which locking down ideas backfires in ways that the people censoring ideas really don't count on. So, before we get into why, I figured we could all experience this firsthand together, okay? So, I'd love for you to do this with me. Think of something or someone that you love. Maybe it's your son or your nephew, maybe it's your favorite guitar or a loved one. For me, it's my dogs. I always have to get them into my presentations because I love them and I miss them. Or that favorite food that you have. So think of something that you love, and then on the count of 3, all of us together, what we're going to do is we're going to say what we love, but we're going to put our hands over our mouths, okay? All right? 1, 2, 3. I love my wife. Okay. Did the fact that you were muzzled just now change at all how you felt or thought? No. Force, muzzling someone, silencing them, doesn't change how we think one iota. As John Locke identified, he said, such is the nature of the understanding, that it cannot be compelled to the belief of anything by outward force. Force doesn't change how people think. Silencing them doesn't change their minds. What does it do? What happens when somebody can't speak their mind? Those ideas are forced underground. Instead of being out in the light of public scrutiny and being criticized by other people, where other people can point out the flaws in those ideas and help that person think a little bit better. Those ideas are muzzled, they're pushed underground, where often they metastasize. You know, it's what we today call echo chamber. You have people saying the same things back and forth to each other, and then it's sort of like the telephone game. It gets worse and worse over time. Really interesting example of this. I talked earlier about Westboro Baptist Church. This is Megan Phelps Roper. Her grandfather was the head of, and is, I believe, still the head of Westboro Baptist Church, unless he recently died, he might have. When she was 5, before she could even read, she went to her first picket. This just shows you how indoctrinated she was. Her parents gave her a sign that she could not read that said, "Death to gays." She was completely deluded with these ideas. Growing up in school, when 9/11 happened in the US, I'm sure you're aware of the Twin Towers being attacked by terrorists. Well, to the horror of her fellow students, she celebrated because, again, this was proof of God's retribution against America for its decadence in allowing gay marriage. When she was about 23, though, something really interesting happened. She decided to take the church's hateful message to Twitter. What do you think happened then? These horrible ideas, and you bring them to Twitter. Of course, many people justifiably were outraged, and they attacked her, and they attacked her ideas. But some people calmly pressed her with questions, pointing out the logical inconsistencies in her ideas, and exposing her to a different point of view. Over time, they put cracks of doubt in her mind. And what happened? In a matter of about a year, her worldview just shattered. These ideas that she grew up indoctrinated with just fell away. She realized that she'd been taught lies all her life. She left the church, she left her family, she left everything. Today, she travels the world talking to people about the principles of intellectual persuasion that enabled her to leave behind those terrible ideas. And she thanks Twitter for enlightenment, kindness, friendship, and even the man that she eventually married, who was one of those few who calmly questioned her and pointed out the logical inconsistencies in her ideas. Now, what if we in the US had a Mr. Morais who said, no, those ideas are too vile. You can't say those things. If she had been censored by the government, what would have happened? None of this. She would not have left these ideas behind. She would still be in Westboro Baptist Church. Another really pernicious consequence of censorship. What happens when you censor somebody? Even if their ideas are bad, what do you do to that person? You give them the moral high ground. You turn them into a sympathetic character. Somebody that you can look to and say, that person is a victim. They should be able to say whatever they want. You turn them into the victim. So it's like David facing Goliath. And now this person, regardless of how bad their ideas are, is David facing the Leviathan. So an example. How many people here are die-hard fans of Carla Zambelli? Okay, so no takers. But how many people here are angered by the fact that she's being censored by the government? A lot more hands. So we are more sympathetic to a person who, as far as I can tell, is pretty much batshit crazy because of the fact that she's being censored by the government. So when you censor somebody, censorship backfires. It causes you to sympathize with the people that are being censored. So if you're the person doing the censoring, you're helping your enemy. And what often happens? Often, that sympathy is so strong that the people in power actually get removed from power, and those who are not in power come to power. So the tables turn, and they use the same mechanisms of censorship that were used against them to silence other people. So this is precisely what happened with the Nazis. Talked earlier about how the German liberal newspapermen wanted to get rid of these Nazi ideas, communist ideas, socialist ideas. Well, they did. Hitler was banned from speaking. The Nazi newspapers were banned from publishing. These ideas were forced underground where they could not be objected to by rational debate. Then when Hitler came to power, do you think he said, oh, I know you guys used to censor me all the time, but I'm going to be the bigger man. I'm going to let you go ahead and say whatever you want? Is that what he did? Hell no. Not at all. He said, when Otto Wells, a social democrat, said, well, there's a lot of benefit when you have this back and forth of debate, when you have this criticism of ideas, it's really beneficial. Well, Hitler had a ready answer for that, didn't he? He just pointed out the double standard. You should have recognized the beneficial power of criticism when we were in the opposition. Back then, our press was verboten. We were not allowed to speak. So the tables turned, and he just used the same censorship that was used against them, against his enemies. Censorship backfires. Key idea of this talk. This is one thing I hope you'll take with you. Censorship backfires. It's impractical. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. But it's also incredibly immoral. It's not just impractical. It still silences those people, even if for only a short amount of time. And why is this so bad? Why is it so terrible when people cannot speak their minds? Because we live by the use of our minds. Man's essential characteristic is his rational faculty, as Ayn Rand put it. Man's mind is his basic means of survival, his only means of gaining knowledge. How many decisions have you had to make today based on your knowledge? From the time you woke up to the time you got here, deciding what to eat for breakfast, what to do with your morning. Maybe you checked out the newspaper, read some articles. When my dogs wake up in the morning, they don't think, oh, I wonder how the stock market's doing, right? They don't think, I wonder if I have time for a quick game of fetch before breakfast. wonder if my owner remembered to order me more food. No, they're not living by the use of their mind in the same way that we humans are. We're a really unique phenomenon in nature. We live by the use of our minds. Reason, thinking, is how we live. How many people here drink tap water in Brazil? Okay, so about as many as are diehard fans of Carla Zambelli, right? Why? Because even water, one of the most basic necessities of life, requires thought to actually purify and produce. And we don't trust the government to do that work, right? Because they can't do it. We need to use the mind to create the values on which our lives depend, whether it's food, water, shelter, or advanced medical procedures, or these incredible technologies that we're taking advantage of right now. All of these things require that people be able to think and act on their thinking to create these values. Part of thinking is communicating. How many times have you had an idea, you're like, wow, I'm brilliant. This is the best idea ever. Such a good idea. And then you have a conversation with a friend, they're like, yeah, but what about this? Did you think of that? Oh crap, I forgot about that, right? And it is through conversation that we have some of our best ideas, and it's how we do some of our best thinking, through dialogue with other people. Think about the Enlightenment. I hope you guys are all fans of the Enlightenment. I sure am. One of my favorite people in history is Benjamin Franklin. And I think he is the Enlightenment personified. I actually live in the first town ever named after Benjamin Franklin in Massachusetts. Benjamin Franklin gave us a unified scientific theory of electricity. How did he do it? He was part of the Republic of Letters, of people sharing their ideas with other people all over the world and getting feedback on those ideas. He was thinking out loud, thinking along with other people, communicating his ideas. If he could not communicate his ideas, if he was stifled, the way many scientists and great thinkers have been throughout history, we wouldn't have all of this, right? If we didn't know what electricity actually was, we wouldn't be able to harness it to make microphones and lights and screens. We'd still be in the dark right now. We'd still be using candles. Another big problem with censorship is that it endows certain individuals with this status as arbiters of truth. Certain people, like a Moraes, for instance, get to say, this is true and that's not. And you can't say this, you can only say this. Rand said, there can be no such thing as a final authority in matters pertaining to human knowledge. The only authority is reality. The only authority is reality. Think of Galileo, for instance. Against the Roman Inquisition, against virtually everyone in the world, Galileo held that the earth revolves around the sun and not vice versa. Neither the number of people who believe an idea nor their status in some hierarchy has any bearing whatsoever on the truth or falsity of that idea. What does? Whether or not that idea corresponds with reality. It either corresponds with reality or it doesn't. Nobody has the authority to tell us, you can't think that. The fact that they do does not change whether or not that idea corresponds with reality. A more recent example, the idea that, for instance, COVID came out of a Wuhan lab was considered a fringe, far-right, ridiculous conspiracy theory. Every major mainstream news outlet treated it that way. If you put comments to that effect on social media, chances were that you would they would be shadow banned, or maybe you'd even lose your account. Until evidence started to pile up and pile up and pile up. No longer is this treated as a fringe theory, right? So to live as rational beings, we have to be able to think and create the values on which our lives depend. And we must be free to speak our minds. Communication is a part of thinking. It's a part of how we create those values. It's also the basis of our rights. Rights are not given to us by government. You in Brazil have the right to free speech. Is that recognized and protected by your government? No, it is not. But it doesn't change the fact that you have it. Rights aren't granted by Moraes. They're not granted by Lula or Bolsonaro. They're not granted by your government. They arise out of the fact that we are a certain type of being that needs to be able to act on our judgment to create the values on which our lives depend. So there's a natural basis for rights here. And every person has the right to act on his own judgment so long as he doesn't violate the equal rights of others, including the right to say whatever he wants, again, so long as he doesn't violate the equal rights of others. Does that mean, does freedom of speech mean that you can say whatever you like, wherever, whenever, without consequences? What do you think? It's interesting. I just read a story about a group of employees at SpaceX who wrote an open letter criticizing Elon Musk, and then they were surprised that they got fired. Okay, well, the guy owns the company, and you just criticized him publicly. Perhaps you had rational grounds, but it's not an infringement of your freedom of speech if you get fired by the guy that is giving you your paycheck, whom you just criticized, right? This is crazy to think this. Now, one exception worth mentioning, if you work for the government and you criticize the government, and the government steps in and says, no, you can't say that, you're fired. Well, in the US, that case has come before the Supreme Court, and they ruled that, no, you can't do that, that's censorship. But by and large, there are gonna be consequences. Suppose you throw a party at your house. Have you ever done this? You throw a party at your house and you invite some people, and maybe you forget that, like, this guy and this girl used to date, but now they don't. And they both get there and they're cool at first, but then they start bickering, and then one of them just turns out to be a real dick and starts saying things, doing things that you don't want on your property. So you kick that person out. Have you violated his right to free speech? No. It's your property. You can do whatever you want. How does this apply to social media? I hear a lot of people, even people that consider themselves liberals, classical liberals, libertarians, make this argument that I'm hearing a lot these days, that social media is like a town square. It's like a public square or something. And so social media companies shouldn't be able to moderate content. They shouldn't be able to kick people off. Freedom of speech means that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, or more generally, that the government will not say, no, you can't say that. The government will not say, no, you can't make that social media post. It doesn't say anything about how private individuals can use their property. That would be a violation of their rights. You hear conservatives in the US often say, oh, well, we need to take on these evil social media companies because they're censoring us. Just got this email the other day, big tech is silencing you. I like that he did use silencing, but this guy, Josh Hawley, often also calls it censorship. Censorship is what the government does against us when we try to speak our minds. It's not what private companies do. So, there's no such thing as a right to violate the rights of other people, right? You cannot demand that social media companies use their property in a way that meets your preferences. What can you do? You can go to a competitor. You can try to get a job at a social media company and change how they do things. You can make a public campaign against them. You have lots of options, but none of those options include violating their property rights. What can you do for freedom of speech more broadly? What can you do starting now? I love this quote from Arthur Ashe: start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. I was also talking to Tatiana just before this, who's been a great hostess, and she reminded me of the great one: be the change you wish to see in the world. If you guys don't want to lose freedom of speech in Brazil, then you've got to protect it on principle. for everyone, even if they say things that you think are untrue, even if they say things that you don't like. Because every idea, every good idea, Galileo's idea, the idea of the earth revolving around the sun, all these ideas were once thought absurd. You know, who was the first guy to think that we could eat eggs, for instance? This thing came out of the rear end of a chicken, you're gonna eat it? That's absurd, right? But if he was silenced because his idea was considered absurd, well, we wouldn't have this delicacy that we all enjoy so much. I had Eggs Benedict this morning. It was fantastic. I wouldn't have thought. So, defend free speech for everybody, no matter how bad their ideas. One resource that I want to offer you guys is a course being taught by Dr. Eric Daniels. He's a professor at Clemson University. He teaches in the Clemson Institute for the Study of Capitalism. He's going to walk through the history of arguments for and against free speech. He's going to arm you with the ammunition that you need to help defend free speech here in Brazil. You can get a full scholarship. Go to objectivestandard.org/free speech or use the QR code here. Next, a course with yours truly. I'm going to be teaching how to write powerfully in defense of liberty starting in mid-January. And we're going to walk step by step through a writing process where you learn principles for persuasively presenting these ideas. So if you want to learn how to leverage the power of your voice to really make a difference, join me for this course. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's also going to be a lot of work. It's not graded or anything, so the work is optional, but you learn to write by doing. By the way, writing is the most organized form of thinking, and regardless of whether you just want to get on TikTok or Instagram and create videos, or get on YouTube and create videos, or give political speeches, all of these things start with getting your ideas out on paper, getting them organized, figuring out how they fit together and how to present them. So writing is really the root of all of this, and it's a skill that I think everyone in the liberty movement really needs to master so that they can be more effective in fighting for free speech. So join me for that, objectivestandard.org/writing. If you're really interested in having a career defending liberty, then you can get paid to learn how to do that while helping us as an organization grow. Objective Standard Institute is trying to bring these ideas to the world. We're currently talking with certain people about how do we do more in Brazil. Perhaps we'll have a conference in Brazil at some point. We're going to need people that know the area, know the language, know what to do here, okay? So if you want to write, if you want to speak, if you want a career fighting for these ideas, we can help take you from where you are to the next step. Lastly, join us for Level Up Conference in June of 2023 in Phoenix, Arizona. We're going to talk about a broad swath of ideas for freedom and flourishing. You can talk to Andressa, some of these other people that have been to our conference. They will vouch for how much fun it is. But it's also a great learning experience, and you'll take away from that a whole bunch of networking opportunities, new ideas for fighting in defense of freedom in Brazil. So start where you are, use what you have. Now you have a whole bunch more resources at your disposal. Take advantage of them. They're all free. Why would you not? And do what you can. As I said, fight for freedom of speech on principle. Every idea, every world-changing, revolutionary, great idea was once thought absurd. People once wanted to censor these people for these ideas. Don't let them. If government has the power to censor these fringe ideas, it's only a matter of time before they can censor your ideas too. And they will. So I leave you with a parting thought from a hero of our American revolution. And I think Brazil needs a revolutionary like this guy, Thomas Paine. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. And I wish you guys in Brazil here a glorious triumph. Thank you very much.